Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
When a national or international tragedy occurs, as it has too much this year, it obscures and trivializes standard daily chatter about things like the economy, social justice, politics, education policy, transportation, etc., etc. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy for 25 years now. I'm Chris William, and deep into our fiscal fourth quarter, business and commerce do indeed matter and are good, especially with the important retail selling season. But where is the overlap between our daily business in life and national security? That is one issue we will bring up later with our guest, South Carolina Congressman Joe Wilson, who is chairman of the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats. But we begin with our panel now.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, John Silvia, Managing Director and Chief Economist of Wells Fargo Securities, Christopher Chung, CEO of the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, and special guest, Congressman Joe Wilson of South Carolina. Now, here's Chris Williams.
Welcome to our program. Happy holidays, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. You too.
John, let's start with you.
Sure.
What do you think is the single biggest concern you have? Here we are deep in the fourth quarter, almost year end. Got 2016 kind of peeking around the corner. What are you most concerned about?
I would say we do face an election year coming up. Traditionally, an election year tends to be very positive for government spending overall. A Fed tends to be more neutral than not. And so when I'm looking out, I think, Chris, the biggest challenge is what happens in 2017. Because you're going to have a new president, probably new policies. There's going to create a little bit of uncertainty. There may be a little bit of a slowdown in government spending. So 2016 looks pretty good, but it's 2017, the first year of the next president's term, that I'm most concerned about.
Yeah, Chris, you were over there nodding to some degree, and you are kind of at the nexus between, well, the partnership now that is economic development in North Carolina is between government and is between private business. To what John says, are you concerned about government spending, especially on a state level, especially when Republicans have been harder than maybe you thought when it came to economic development?
I don't know that it so much affects what we're focused on. A lot of our activity tends to be driven by private industry and what the spending is for capital budgets. I mean, the types of projects we're focused on trying to recruit to North Carolina are much more a function of what companies have allocated for their new spending. But these things all tie together. Of course, as you all know, it's part of a broader economic picture. I do know that over the past year, the phone has not stopped ringing in spite of having gone through some of these issues with some uncertainty over our tax and incentives policy. Throughout that time, North Carolina was continuing to get looked at for a lot of the types of corporate investment projects that we're competing for every day.
Yeah. Transportation is big in the calculus of what North and South Carolina are doing right now. John, what do you think the risk in not having good transportation practice? Maybe good policy, but maybe not good practice. In other words, the transportation is always kind of couched against education spending in North Carolina. We can't do both. We can't do both well. What do you think North Carolina and South Carolina need to do about transportation?
Well, I liked your intro that you did talk about transportation. And certainly, I think when you talk about lower energy prices, we have to remember that trade and transportation is a significant employer in this state. and in South Carolina. And it doesn't take you very long to look at the truck stops, to look at what we see on I-85 and 77 in terms of transportation. Absolutely. If you want to see problems, again, many of us are very familiar with the bottlenecks that we're experiencing in other areas of the country. And again, we look at Atlanta. We talked earlier about challenges that Atlanta has in terms of transportation. Absolutely essential. Remember, the airport is absolutely key. With that airport comes railroad transportation, highway transportation, trucks. I think it's absolutely essential.
Right, I'm going to give you a chance to weigh in on this, Chris, but South Carolina has done a fairly good job now being reactive around the I-26 corridor, and especially when it comes to that truck and heavy traffic. Chris, in North Carolina, there's a very acutely emotional debate around toll roads in North Mecklenburg, in North Charlotte. How does that factor in what John just talked about and having good transportation, effective policy and practice going forward?
Well, I think transportation is ultimately one of those criteria that companies look at when they're evaluating a location. And there's great surveys that we look at every year showing what factors that businesses consider foremost when they're deciding where to expand and relocate. And at the top of that list perennially is an issue like highway accessibility. So how you get there, how do you ensure good logistical access for companies that are focused on transportation issues, that's probably open to debate. But the key factor is you've got to have that sound physical infrastructure, especially in a high growth environment like North Carolina. Our biggest issue, like John and I were talking about earlier, is managing that in-migration of population that we continue to see in the state. I suspect South Carolina is facing similar issues as well. That's not a problem a lot of states are fortunate enough to have, but what we can't allow is for our transportation to get behind that population growth. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in a situation like Austin with terrible traffic congestion, or even places like Atlanta that John just referred to.
And so Chris, are toll roads, are they in North Carolina's future, whether we like it or not, depending on how you come down on the debate?
That I don't know. Again, not being involved in the transportation planning, I suspect is a very regional, local type decision that's driven by these transportation planning councils that are formed on a district or regional level.
Same question, John.
Well, I just come back from Los Angeles. I think that the freeways, the highways, have gradually become much more toll roads. And they have toll lanes, and maybe not so much for the trucks, but certainly trying to rationalize the individual passenger transportation and thinking about carpooling, 2 people, 3 people in a car. So I would say over time the answer would be yes. As Charlotte grows, as Raleigh goes, there's probably going to be more emphasis on tollways to try to rationalize the use of the road.
We've got about a minute left for our guest, and it's not going to give you enough time to talk about this in depth, Chris. But so we're 1 year now after, at least in North Carolina, you are 1 year after the official rollout of what the new economic development framework looks like. It is a partnership. It is a nonprofit. How has it worked? What have you learned?
So first off, congrats on the 25-year anniversary of this show. I hope the Economic Development Partnership gets to 25 years. 1 is pretty good. I think it's going well so far. It's a new organization, as you said. The first year is pretty critical. A lot of my time has been spent communicating the role of this new organization in the economic development landscape of North Carolina. A lot of our time has been spent on raising those private funds that augment the public funding we get. Our numbers across the board look very solid, both on the business recruitment front, the travel and visitor spending amount, export assistance. I'm very encouraged by what we've seen this first year, but of course, like any new organization, there's a lot of work to be done. We benefit when the economy is strong, so I'm going to be cornering John here afterwards just to see what his specific predictions are. But I think we're in a good position. We have a great product to offer in terms of North Carolina. We just have to put together a good organization and go out and sell that product effectively.
Yeah, okay, well said. Get him while you can, by the way.
I will.
He's kind of slippery like that. He's hard to get.
I'll take your
And I
word
mean
for it.
that with love, John. Thank you, gentlemen.
Sure.
Stay on our program. Next week on this program, he is the junior senator from the Tar Heel State. He was Speaker of the House for the North Carolina General Assembly. Senator Tom Tillis will be our guest on this program. And then upcoming, speaking of Dr. John Silvia, he's going to also be on our we do a two-part economic outlook and then an economic review and an economic outlook about what happened in 2015 and what happened in 2016. Very compelling dialogue, very lively and also informative. We hope you'll join us for that coming up. It doesn't tell you the whole story about the guy, but you might describe our guest as a career politician to some degree, serving on the staffs of Strom Thurmond and Floyd Spence from South Carolina. Then he spent 17 years in the South Carolina State House Senate chamber, followed by election to South Carolina's 2nd Congressional District in 2001. Now, he is Assistant Majority Whip on the House Armed Services Committee. He is chairman of the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats. He also serves on the Committee on Education and Workforce on the Committee of Foreign Affairs. He's been appointed to the highly influential Republican Policy Committee. He also serves on the chair of the Bulgarian Caucus, the French Caucus, the co-chair of the Afghan and the Kurdistan Caucus, to name just a few. We welcome the Honorable and Representative from South Carolina's 2nd Congressional District, Joe Wilson. Your Honor, welcome.
Well, Chris, it's an honor to be with you. And again, I want to second Christopher's comments. 25 years. Congratulations.
Thank you. We still don't know how that happened, Your Honor, but thank you.
No, hey, you're being accurate. This is good.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Mr. Congressman, I want to just get this out of the way, and I'm compelled by this. Anyone that knows you will say that and I call it this, your outburst in the State of the Union address in September of 2009 was very unlike Joe Wilson, is what many people said. The outburst was when the president was talking about Obamacare and that it would not cover illegal immigrants. You just plainly said, you lie. Where did that come from?
Well, I've been briefed on it, ironically, that day. And I found out what the president said was wrong. And then he actually, Chris, said it twice. It was the second time. It was a town hall moment. And then that evening, I actually spoke to Rahm Emanuel. They said they'd like to speak with me, and I did. I called him, and I apologized for the interruption. I respect the president, but I did know the issue. And then I don't want to ruin Rahm's reputation, but it was Reagan-esque. He and the president both indicated, we accept the apology, now let's discuss the issues. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I'm also very grateful. I received 500,000 letters from all over the United States of people who expressed support that I understood the issue. And then, more important, the voters I represent, my margin of victory in the next election, despite the fact that I've been targeted by Ms. Pelosi, and with $5 million, I was reelected by a margin increase from 7% to 10%. And so I'm just grateful that my whole focus has been to discuss issues and not personalities as we proceed forward.
So you have spent many years in the State House in South Carolina. Now you've spent many years in Congress.
Yes.
Where do you think this idea of a diminished congeniality and a bad decorum between legislators has come from?
And Chris, that's the popular perception. It's really not accurate. On a daily basis, I work with Congressman Jim Langevin as the ranking member on the Emerging Threats Subcommittee. I worked for years with Congresswoman Susan Davis of California as she was chairman and then ranking. And so we really do work together. Again, I don't want to hurt her reputation, but I have traveled and I know Nancy Pelosi and her husband Paul. And we always have civil conversation. We just don't agree. And then in my home state, all of us, I have worked very closely with Congressman Jim Clyburn on state issues. I'm not aware of any state issue that we haven't worked on. Transportation, support of the Savannah River site. I can name issue at the flooding. We work together. So issue after issue, there really is a relationship. We would just disagree on issues, but it's not personal.
Yeah, John.
Well, again, let's talk education, because I think in my experience, and I've only been here 13 years, not 25, but my experience is the educational quality in both South and North Carolina have dramatically improved over the last dozen or so years. But there seems to still be the argument that there's a skill shortage. What about education that can make a difference in terms of policy to deal with what was perceived as a skill shortage?
Well, I'm so excited. Governor Nikki Haley, working with your colleague, Bobby Hitt of the State Department of Commerce, and it really goes back, and this is bipartisan too. Now, lightning's going to strike. And that is, it was a former U.S. Senator, former Governor, Fritz Hollings, along with my predecessor, Floyd Spence, worked to create the technical college system of South Carolina. It's one of the best in the world. And the reason that we have now in South Carolina, with BMW, we are now the leading exporter of cars of any state in the union. with tire manufacturing, Bridgestone, Japanese, Michelin, French, Continental, which is German, and then Getty Tire, which is going to be located on I-77, is from Singapore. The reason these companies can locate here is that, John, that we have a technical college system where they can locate and maintain their proprietary security of the equipment that the persons will be working on. It will be at the school. The young people, and it's not all young people, it's second careers for many people, can go to the technical college, can learn and be proficient in the equipment. So on the very day that it sets up, we are there manufacturing, and that's why South Carolina, who would ever imagine, is the leading manufacturer of tires of any state in the union, the leading exporter of tires of any state in the union. And of course, that gets us to Boeing aircraft. We're thrilled about that. And the success there of 8,000 employees, the ripple effect across South Carolina, across the Carolinas, which is positive. And now, again, another achievement of Governor Haley has been Volvo to be located in Berkeley County of South Carolina on I-26 for assembly. And so we've got another 4,000 employees coming in that direction. So over and over, the technical college system has been the key to success.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Chris?
So I was going to say, you cited a few examples of prominent foreign direct investment coming, whether it's companies like Bridgestone from Japan, Michelin from France, or Getty from Singapore. What are some of the things that you think the United States needs to do better to make sure that we continue to attract private business investment from overseas rather than see it go to markets like Mexico or China or somewhere else around the world?
Well, and Chris, I think something that's been very successful, and I worked on it again today, or this week, in Congress, and that is maintaining the independence of our workers. They have freedom to join a union or not. They're not forced to join a union. And so I introduced the National Labor Relations Board Reform Act. We have currently an NLRB which is biased. It was meant to reflect the wishes of the prevailing political party. The trouble is it's gotten out of hand. And so there are 3 union attorneys and 2 other members, and the 3 union attorneys appointed by the president are, I think, making decisions which are making the United States unattractive. And it's also putting the workers of our country at risk, denying them the ability to have elections by promoting card check, where you wouldn't have elections, denying the ability of recertification, denying the ability of workers to determine where political contributions are made. And so I'm hoping that we can maintain, and gosh, we've seen the success of this, the right to work law in our state is the reason we've had such phenomenal successes.
Yeah, so let's take that a little bit further, Congressman. As chair of the subcommittee on emerging threats, how do you balance out being preemptive and effective, still not giving up civil liberties, but doing all we can do to protect national security? I mean, where is that? What kind of dialogue are you having around
Well,
that?
we're having a story. It really is encouraging, and it's not far away. Across the Savannah River, the U.S. Cyber Command of the Army is being developed. And so there are efforts, and then the good news is it goes back to colleges and universities. There are now cybersecurity courses and complete agendas that are where we're studying this, where people who are much more knowledgeable than me are coming up with safeguards because our country is under attack millions of times a day. And I have introduced legislation that would quantify what the level of attacks are so that we can have between the civilian world and the military world and the government world that everybody speaks the same language.
John?
Yeah, I think that is a balance. I think that's a good point, Chris, is how we balance these issues. And I would say in some of what I've read in the last 3 or 4 days, the balance has shifted towards we really do need to know. We need to have the information. And I'm impressed that you're developing that Army cybersecurity facility.
It's going to be right at Fort Gordon. Of course, I have an ulterior interest. I want the people who work there to live in Aiken and Edgefield.
Chris?
Well, no, nothing on this issue.
Yeah. Any other issue? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we've got a presidential campaign coming up next year. I mean, what are some issues that you are near and dear to your heart that you don't see being talked about by candidates on either side?
Well, the great thing is that South Carolina is quite obvious. Our primary is February the 20th. And so it is, to me, it's heartwarming. Wherever I go, there's a presidential candidate. And And it's been I think it's been a positive experience for the people of South Carolina. Hopefully, North Carolina gets to observe. And but it's every issue is being covered, and particularly to me, and this is why I appreciate Senator Lindsey Graham, who I've worked with for so many years. But he was the one who was sort of a lone voice about the need for national security to protect American families. And so many people said, "We really don't want to hear about that. It's such bad news." Well, it is bad news. And it's a threat to American families as we see what's occurred with the attack in Paris. But yet the pledge of attacks, which should be taken seriously, of identifying Washington, identifying Rome, identifying New York City, we should take identifying the White House. I hope the president changes course. We've got to be serious about this to protect American families.
What do you mean by that? How should he change tact on this?
Well, we need to identify the enemy as radical Islam. Somehow he's come up with all kind of contortions of workplace violence, drive-by shooting, all kind of bizarre terms that divert attention. We're in a global war on terrorism, and it was so extraordinary to me to have the opportunity to visit the 9/11 memorial in New York City, where I learned that actually the declaration of war against us was in 1997. And it's right there. They've got copies of the fatwas declaring war on Western civilization. And then to see the consequence, the mass murder of 9/11. So the president should recognize that. And the bottom line, wherever, to me, wherever there's a safe haven, we must make every effort. It doesn't have to be alone. As we see, the world is truly subject to attack in Mali and in Africa. There's not a place where a country I work with very closely is India. No country, they've lost 60,000 people to cross-border terrorism. So they understand. We've got different countries that should be working together. But wherever there's a safe haven, and the thought of allowing ISIS to exist, it is so disappointing looking back not to have a status of forces agreement with Iraq. That would have been a way of maintaining security for that country, for the well-being of that country. It would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and the consequence of the destabilization of Syria. And then I'm so disappointed. I said it's disappointed. The president announced a red line and then didn't live up to protecting the people of Syria from gas attacks, chemical attacks. And so the message was received that the United States is not serious.
We've got a couple minutes left, and I don't want to not talk about this, but I want to make sure that we get your opinion on transportation. You were involved in transportation when you were in the South Carolina State House. It's no surprise that both North and South Carolina have transportation squarely as, if not job one, then job two and job one. What does South Carolina need to do differently or think differently about getting transportation funded more fully?
Well, I was the first Republican chairman of the Transportation Committee in the state Senate ever. And so it was but I saw firsthand good people who, the funds are there. We need to properly use the funds that are there, but we also need to have alternatives. And I fully agree that an alternative that would work are tolls. And we have the Cross Island Expressway at Hilton Head Island that is a classic example of success. It's a great reason to go visit Hilton Head. And, but it works. And it's been very, very positive. And so where it's possible, to me, tolls are a great example of what could be success.
Is there, I'm sorry guys, but we're going to run out of time. Is there a different formula that needs to be, does Nikki Haley need to be more accepting of some kind of gas tax, or is there something else?
To me, there's sufficient funding. It's my understanding in the last like 5 years, there's been a 60% increase in funding. It's how the money is being spent. And so that's my view. And then on formulas, we need to be cognizant. In South Carolina has a really bizarre situation of the number of state roads, more so than even another state like North Carolina, and then a confused system of local roads and
Yeah.
The bottom line is that I have faith in Governor Haley. I have faith
Okay.
in the Speaker of the House.
And we're going to have
Jay
to wrap it
Lucas.
up. I'm sorry, Mr. Congressman, we're literally out of time. Thank you. Please come back, though.
Well,
We can
hey, honored
finish
to
this
be
thought.
here. This is,
Yeah.
hey, again, 25 years. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's been a team effort. Congratulations to you. Thank you for your service, and especially your son, the AG in South Carolina. I know
Well,
you're
Attorney
proud of
General Alan Wilson, he's a great
Yeah.
guy.
Chris, good to have you on the program. again.
Always good to be here. Thank you very much.
Dr. Silvia,
Yes, sir.
always.
Thank you.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Happy holidays. Bye now.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.